Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here are your hosts, John Joseph Adams and David Barr Kirtley.
Hi, this is Dave.
And this is John.
And welcome to episode 55 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Our guest today is Michael Chabon. He's the author of novels such as The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, Gentlemen of the Road, and The Yiddish Policeman's Union. His novel Wonder Boys was adapted into a feature film, and he recently worked on the screenplay for the new Disney movie John Carter, based on the novels of Edgar Rice Burroughs.
All right, well, let's get to our interview.
All right, so we're here with Michael Chabon. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's very good to be here.
So first of all, just how did you first encounter the John Carter books, and what sort of an impact did they have on you? I
first encountered them in Page One books in Columbia, Maryland in about 1973, I guess. Whenever the Ballantine books reissued them with those stunning Gino Dashiell covers, they appeared somewhat magically, like the monolith in 2001, in a display, cardboard display dump in the bookstore. This beautiful display with a big piece of artwork on the top of it, and then I guess maybe all 15 books in this display, each with this stunning cover, and it had a sense of obvious cultural importance, at least to me at age 10 or 11, where I just, inspired this immediate desire in me to know more, to visit, to go there and see what this was about. What was this thing? Who was John Carter, and what was going on with this green guys and red-skinned beautiful princesses and flying boats and everything I was seeing on the covers of these books. And, I bought the first one and I loved it, and I went back and bought the next one, and then I discovered that the Science Fiction Book Club was publishing them with equally arresting covers by Frank Frazetta in kind of double editions, 2 books in one. So I started to get those because I was a member of the Science Fiction Book Club. And then not long after that, Marvel Comics, which I was also a great devotee, started doing comic book version of the same character. And that just kind of cemented it all in my mind. And so I was having a multimedia experience with the character of John Carter and the world of Barsoom, and I branched out pretty quickly into the Tarzan books and the Pellucidar and everything Burroughs wrote. I mean, Edgar Rice Burroughs was one of my first fan crushes as a writer. He was one of my first favorite writers, and I read a biography of him that came out, was published around then, that my public library had this big giant hardcover biography of Edgar Rice Burroughs, and I used to sign my name, Mike Burroughs Chabon. So I was obsessed. I did read my children A Princess of Mars when they were younger. I had kept in touch with those books. I had sort of reacquired the Marvel comic book versions of them, and then in the mid-90s, I wrote a screenplay, an original screenplay called The Martian Agent, that was, it was kind of a steampunk thing before the term steampunk was really in wide circulation. And, I drew very heavily on my memories of Barsoom and of reading those books and creating the Mars in that screenplay, which also had canals and savage tribesmen and weird creatures and all of that. So I never lost touch with that material. It always remained very important to me, and it was in part because of my experience writing that screenplay that I ended up, coming onto the radar screen of Andrew Stanton.
So based on the trailer, it looks like some changes have been made to the story. How do you balance staying true to the source material versus the needs of the current project?
Andrew Stanton and Mark Andrews, his collaborator, had already made a lot of the hard decisions about what to keep and what to let go. They had already analyzed the multiple characters. Say there's, 3 evil Sarks chieftains, and we really only need one evil dark chieftain. We don't need three. Burroughs, as you guys know, he introduces the idea of telepathy, and everyone on Barsoom is telepathic. It's a terrible idea, and Burroughs realizes that very quickly and completely abandons it eventually, because it makes storytelling impossible. If everybody can read everyone else's mind, you can't have secret plans, and you can't have hidden agendas, and those are the meat and potatoes of storytelling. And so even Edgar Rice Burroughs betrayed his own story. So in a sense, we had his imprimatur. Another example is the fact that John Carter is immortal. When we first meet him in the first book, there's such a really bizarre element that apparently Burroughs derived from a popular novel of the time. And, it has nothing to do with anything. It's completely irrelevant. And again, he very quickly just, it doesn't even abandon it. It just withers away and never returns. As I said, they had already made a lot of those choices. They had already made a lot of those decisions. They had also made the very key decision to take material from the first three novels and to sort of consider those first three novels in the series as a whole, and then look at the entire matter of those three novels as potentially the matter for three films. Each of those films would be conceived independently to tell its own discrete story, separate from the others, so that if you didn't see the first film and you only saw the second one, you wouldn't be lost. You would be able to follow what was going on, and it would present you with a satisfying experience on its own. And so there are elements in the first film, the one that we're talking about today, that don't actually appear in the novels until the second book. And I think, again, with all due respect to Edgar Rice Burroughs, who, as I've already said, was one of my great literary gods going back to the age of 11, but he was making it up as he went along. He was writing by the seat of his pants. He was writing for money. He was writing very quickly. He was being paid half a cent a word. A Princess of Mars was the first thing he ever wrote, ever. He didn't really know what he was doing yet. I mean, as none of us would, and none of us did when we wrote the first thing that we ever wrote. And, clearly he was remarkably gifted. He was able to do such a good job his first time out, but he got better. By the time you get to the fifth book, Chessmen of Mars, that's actually a really good book, written by an experienced professional writer with a lot of words under his belt. Like any pulp writer of his time, there wasn't time to go back over it, to ask yourself, does it really make sense for all of my characters' names to begin either with an S or a TH? No, it's a terrible idea. It's really confusing. It was confusing to me when I was a kid. I had a hard time distinguishing Sarkoja and Sola and Tarkus and Tardos Mors and Tharks and Therns and Thotes. And, I think if Burroughs had a little more time, or he had an editor who felt that the editor had a little more time, they probably would have gone over those things and straightened it out a little bit and clarified it. We were saddled to a certain degree with things that could not be changed, like the names of the most important characters, for example, but boy, did we wish we could change them. Your ultimate goal is to create a good movie or even a great movie. Your ultimate goal is not to sort of literally transcribe the action of the book onto film, which would ultimately, I think, be doing a dishonor to the book, because you would be able to capture none of the rich, strange magic of that book in so doing, and therefore you're betraying the book.
Okay, so I thought it was really interesting in your memoir, Manhood for Amateurs, John Carter actually comes up during a conversation about whether or not to circumcise your son. Could you talk about that?
Well, it was in the context of discussing with my wife the argument that many opponents of circumcision put forward, that having a foreskin increases a man's sexual pleasure. And, it's a tantalizing argument for a circumcised man to contemplate, but then it also involves a certain amount of impossibility, a failure of imagination, because I mean, for one thing, how much more pleasurable do I need sex to be? It's already pretty awesome. And furthermore, like, what would that be? Like, I can't even begin to imagine it. And in sort of trying to imagine the unimaginable, whenever I'm confronted with a problem of, irrational numbers or string theory, anything that's asking you to sort of imagine the unimaginable, for example, greater sexual pleasure in this case, I always come back to the 9 rays of the Barsoomian spectrum, the 9 colors of the Barsoomian spectrum, where we are told by Burroughs that there are 9 colors. And as a kid, I just would try to imagine what other colors there could be besides the 7 basic colors and what they would look like and how you would even know that's what they were if you had earthly eyes and so on. And so that's how Barsoom worked its way into that particular discussion.
So you said that you started out wanting to be a fantasy and science fiction writer. How did you end up writing books like Wonder Boys instead?
Well, it's not that I wanted to be a fantasy and science fiction writer. It's that I wanted to be a writer. And when I imagined the kinds of books that I wanted to write, they were the kind of books that I loved to read. So at any given moment in my life, from the point that I decided to be a writer forward, which was around this time, I discovered Burroughs and then Arthur Conan Doyle right around the same time, and those were kind of my first 2 crushes. I would imagine writing books that I loved to read. When I was in my early to mid-teens, that was a very heavy diet of science fiction and fantasy, so those were the kind of books I tended to imagine writing someday, or even began to try to write. And just as I got older and read more widely, those imagined books changed along with my readerly diet. Although I never stopped reading, and I still to this day have never stopped reading fantasy and science fiction. Just started rereading Mervyn Peake's Gormenghast trilogy, which I haven't read in about 30 years. And I'm a big Ian Banks fan, and I never abandoned genre fiction as a reader at all. And what happened, after The Mystery of the Pittsburgh and Wonder Boys, the book you mentioned, and the short stories that I wrote at the beginning of my career as a published writer, presented me eventually with this puzzle to myself of what happened to that idea of writing the kinds of books that you love to read? Like, yes, the books that I was writing were modeled to some degree on other books that I loved, but my diet as a reader had never abandoned things that my output as a writer was just clearly not reflecting. And I wondered about that, like, why am I not writing? Why does my backlist look so monochromatic when the spectrum of my reading is so multicolored? And I didn't really have a good answer. I had a lot of sort of shameful, cowardly answers for that question. Like, I had been taught sort of early on in college and graduate school that I wouldn't be taken seriously if I wrote genre fiction. And not only would I not be taken seriously, but people just really didn't want to read it. Like my workshop mates and my workshop leaders. I had workshop leaders who just out and out said, please do not turn science fiction into this workshop. That was discouraging, obviously. And, if I had had more courage or more integrity, I might have stood up to it more than I did. But I wanted to be read, and I wanted to receive the benefit of whatever benefit there was to be received from people I was in workshop with and the teachers I was studying from. And I wasn't looking for a fight, and it wasn't like I don't love F. Scott Fitzgerald and John Cheever and Vladimir Nabokov and Eudora Welty and all those people. I love their work just as much as, if not more in some cases, than, Arthur C. Clarke or Frank Herbert or whoever it might have been. So I had just sort of allowed myself to fall into this channel as a writer that at some point I realized I didn't want to be limited to anymore.
So you also edited two anthologies for McSweeney's with the aim of exposing readers to a wider range of genres and making it okay for short stories to have a plot.
Right.
How successful would you say that was, and why did the project stop after 2 books?
I don't know. I would like to know how successful the project was. I mean, in terms of the short story, I don't think it worked. I mean, I just don't see, if you kind of take a quick look at the quote, I'm always going to put this term in quotes, maybe we can just have this be understood, but at the so-called literary outlets for short fiction, I don't see a whole lot of ghost stories and sea stories and pirate tales being presented in the literary context. What I was really trying to do was rekindle my own interest in the short story form, which had abated quite a lot when I first began to contemplate what emerged as that first McSweeney issue number 10. I mean, I have written very little in the way of short fiction since then, so even on a personal level, it didn't really work. But when you turn to the novel, you look at the most recent novels by Colson Whitehead, Gary Steingart, Rick Moody, come on, Cormac McCarthy. I don't know. I mean, there's so many examples. There's almost been a little floodlit of so-called literary writers either embracing or circling around clear literary genres.
Well, yeah, and speaking of clear literary genres, you wrote this great Lovecraftian horror story called The God of Dark Laughter. How did that story come about, and were you surprised to see it appear in The New Yorker?
Well, that was actually sort of my second foray. I wrote a story. I had created this fictional character in the novel Wonder Boys of August Van Zorn, who we're told is kind of a writer of Lovecraftian horror fiction, who had an early influence on the main character of that book. And at some point, I just got the idea to try to write an August Van Zorn story. You know, the pseudonym has always existed as a way to protect the quote-unquote serious literary writer from the taint of genre fiction. And so, I mean, that's how August Van Zorn used it. In the book, his real name's Albert Vetch, and he writes under the name of August Van Zorn because he's a literary professor. He's a professor of literature, and he has to use a pseudonym for that kind of sordid fare that he's cranking out. And that pseudonym was there for me as a kind of fig leaf, too, to just imagine writing a straight piece of horror fiction, you know, that wasn't meta or, you know, sort of playing with the tropes of horror fiction in a literary way. I just wanted to write a straight out story about some awful goings on in this small western Pennsylvania town that turned out to be rooted in some ancient cult of the Elder Ones, you know, just straight ahead Lovecraftian mythos kind of stuff. And I guess I felt when I did that, that I had to protect myself under that pseudonym of August Van Zorn that I had created. It was a double fiction at that point. And I wrote a story that was called In the Black Mill. And when I finished it, I thought it came out well. I believe my agent sent it to the New Yorker, who wouldn't even, I mean, it's been a very brief period of time on the editorial desk there before reemerging with its dignity somewhat in tatters. And then she sent it to Playboy, to a great fiction editor who used to be at Playboy named Alice Turner, who was a great champion of all kinds of genre writing in the literary context. And she took it and wanted to publish it, but she insisted that I publish it under my own name. And God bless her, because that was right. I wrote that story. And, you know, if I want to write a piece of Lovecraftian horror fiction, I not only have the freedom to do so, but I also ought to be proud of it and put my name on it and let it just go out there with it, along with everything else that I've written. And so that was published in Playboy and, you know, got a little bit of attention from the sort of horror fiction crowd, and it got included in Year's Best Horror Stories anthology, the Datlow anthology, and that encouraged me. And so at some point a little idea popped into my head about clowns, and what if clowns really looked that way? and weren't makeup at all. And there was something really horrifying to me in the thought. I mean, everybody, the coulrophobia has a name because a lot of people think clowns are terrifying and creepy. It's not just John Wayne Gacy's fault. There's something about a clown in the abstract with the white skin and the red mouth and all of that it's bizarre anybody could have ever thought it was anything but horrifying, in my opinion. But in any case, just trying to get at that and wonder about clowns and why they look the way they do, and in trying to answer that question, the answer occurred to me in the form of a horror story, and this time I just wrote it without any monkey business about it being by August Van Zorn or any of that, but I set it in the same fictional Van Zornian universe of Plunkettsburg, which is sort of the western Pennsylvania town that he set all of his fiction in, as we're told in Wonder Boys. That was more for my own pleasure than it had nothing to do with wanting to wear a fig leaf of respectability anymore. And that time, I mean, maybe it's proof of that something had changed, because when that one, my agent sent that one to the New Yorker first, and they took it. And maybe part of the reason for that is because it was a little more thinkable, a little less unacceptable for them to publish a piece of straight genre fiction. And, the fact that they've published Stephen King since then, I think, suggests that there has been a change. And that's as it should be, because, I mean, that's where it all comes from. And one of the points I was trying to make in the McSweeney's anthologies and what the introductions I wrote for those, is that it was not even 100 years ago, and certainly as long ago as 150 years ago, when all kinds of incredibly important work was being done by writers in France and England and Russia and Germany, a great European literary 19th century tradition, is a genre tradition. I mean, and just unmistakably, unashamedly, unabashedly, in the works of the greatest writers of the 19th century, you find sea stories and ghost stories and adventure stories and early forms of proto-science fiction and fantasy across the board. And that kind of boundarylessness, or literary realms where the boundaries are very porous and indistinct and can be kind of reconfigured at will, is much more interesting and appealing to me as a writer than a world where the categories are really set and really distinct, and the boundaries are really high, and people have to stay where they start and can't move out of those categories. I mean, that's just inherently deathly. And the reasons why it changed are bad reasons. They're economic and financial and marketing kinds of reasons, and they have to do with snobbery and academic laziness. And I mean, there's almost no good reasons involved for that change that took place over between a writer like Dickens, who wrote crime fiction and supernatural fiction as easily as social realist fiction, and often all in the same story.
So you also just had a short story in the New Yorker called Citizen Khan. Could you just say what made you want to go back to the theme of comic book creators?
That was actually a piece of a story I had started a while ago and had abandoned because I couldn't figure out how to finish it. And I stumbled across it and reread it, and suddenly it was clear to me how it needed to be resolved, and I rewrote it. And so, I mean, in a way, I returned very literally to a fictional world I had left behind, because, I started that story a while after Cavalier and Clay, but not so long after Cavalier and Clay. I think some stories just take that long. Some stories, that one took a decade to write. And I've had that experience before with returning to a short story that I wasn't able to finish, and after many years, and suddenly having it clear to me what needs to be done. I think it's just part of the process sometimes. But it wasn't like I made any kind of deliberate decision, now it's time to go back to comics at all. It was just I actually truly just was going through my hard drive looking for something, and I saw that file, and I opened it up, and I was like, oh my God, I forgot about this story. Wow, this is actually kind of a good beginning. Why did I stop working on this? And then I got to the point where I had left off and thought, oh, I remember now. I couldn't figure out what to do, and now I what about this? And it was just an accident.
I guess just finally, are there any other new or upcoming projects that you'd like to mention?
Well, I have a novel coming out in September from HarperCollins called Telegraph Avenue. That's the main thing. That's the only for certain thing. I'm working on a project at Disney right now, a film called The Magic Kingdom. I'm doing a revision of a pre-existing script, working with Jon Favreau, but that's still in pretty early stages. And then my wife and I are developing a TV series for HBO with a strong kind of genre connections, it's called Hobgoblin, and it's about a team of con artists and stage magicians and various charlatans who are assembled by British intelligence during World War II to fight against German spies. And we're having a lot of fun with that one. But again, that's also a long way away from any kind of certainty.
Okay, so unfortunately we're all out of time, so we're going to have to wrap things up there. So Michael Chabon, thanks so much for joining us on Geek's Guide to the Galaxy.
Absolutely, my pleasure. I really enjoy talking to you guys. Thanks so much for giving me the chance.
And that was our interview. So thanks so much to Michael Chabon for joining us on the show. All right, so now we're going to talk about Disney's John Carter movie, which John and I just watched. We should say, actually, that this is going to involve some spoilers for the John Carter movie, and also for the first three books in the first three Edgar Rice Burroughs Barzoom books, Princess of Mars, Gods of Mars, and Warlord of Mars. So just be warned about that. John and I, John did this Barzoom anthology, and I wrote a story for it, and we've been doing all sorts of interviews about John Carter and stuff. And so we really, were hoping that this movie was going to be great. And I saw the second trailer in particular. I just got a really bad feeling that the movie was going to be terrible after seeing that second trailer. So when the movie started, I wanted to like it, but I was afraid. And mm-hmm. So at the beginning I was like, I was so relieved. I was so almost ecstatic that it just seemed to be so good. I mean, we start out and we meet John Carter, and he's this Confederate officer who doesn't want to fight anymore. And they've changed his personality. It seems like a lot in this movie. At least that's how it seemed to me. I mean, I think of John Carter as being very earnest and never backs down from a fight, or never has any.
He's kind of an unbearable braggart, just like he's so proud of how awesome he is, and he's very humble in the movie, actually. So I mean, that was kind of a welcome change. I think it would probably be a little unbearable if he was that smug the whole movie.
Yeah, so he rides out, and it follows the book pretty closely. He sort of instead of his prospecting buddy, it's this army officer who's wounded. They're escaping from the Apaches, and they take shelter in this cave. And the Apaches have them cornered, but then they turn around when they, there's something about this cave that they know is bad news. I was a little weirded out by how they had changed it to be a Thurn with a teleportation amulet kind of thing. So in the book, right, John Carter's in this cave, and it's the Apaches, right? They see some evil something. They see something behind him that scares them, and they run away. And we never, as the readers, find out what it is. And then he sort of falls and wakes up on Mars. I think, and it sort of deals in astral projection, which, I can sort of see for 2012 audience is maybe not going to cut it. So they make it a more Arthur C. Clarke, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic kind of thing that gets him to Mars.
I mean, in the books, like, John Carter is made out to be like this super special guy. Like, he's forever young for some reason, and like he doesn't remember ever being young. And obviously he's this one. Well, I mean, he's one of two guys, I guess, who ends up mysteriously transporting to Mars. And but I mean, for a long while, he's the only guy. And I think it works better if he's just like he's just some guy from Earth who happens to stumble upon this and then gets transported there, instead of being an inherently special guy. because, you know, what makes him special on Mars is that he's from Earth, like sort of like the Superman deal where, you know, Superman comes from a planet with, you know, where there's higher gravity or whatever. And so whatever. So he has like superpowers when he comes to Earth because it's different. And you know, that's kind of what happens with John Carter is that, you know, when he's on Mars, he's basically got superpowers because he comes from Earth where the gravity's, you know, heavier.
And speaking of the gravity, I thought that was wonderful. That part where, and that's straight out of the book too, where he's sort of bouncing when he first arrives on Mars and the gravity is so much less and he's just like bouncing around all over the place and it takes him a while before he can sort of figure out how to walk.
Yeah.
It seems like the audience really got a kick out of that.
We should say that we saw an early screening of this that was partially reserved for press, but there was actually a lot of regular people who were in the audience as well. So when we say the audience got a kick out of it, we're actually talking about like mostly regular people, you know, not press, that were enjoying the film. So, but speaking of the jumping, though, I think my favorite part of the whole movie is just John Carter interacting with the Tharks. And their initial meeting is pretty funny and entertaining. It's like, you know, he meets Tars Tarkas and you know, Tars Tarkas is approaching him in a very you know, reasonable fashion. You know, it's kind of funny to see it because it's like in most movies it's like, you know, the alien is just going to shoot first, ask questions later, and the intelligent human has to, or the civilized human has to like, you know, make peace with him and convince him to give him a shot. But it's like, you know, Tars Tarkas is immediately like, you know, puts up his arms and puts down his weapons and is you know, very very accommodating to this strange alien creature that he finds. But yeah, no, I mean, their relationship is really great, and I mean, it's like, I mean, and that's one of the things that's great about the books too is their relationship.
And we should say Tars Tarkas is the leader of the Tharks, which is one of the tribes of green Martians, and so they're, you know, 12 feet tall or something and green and have 4 arms.
Yeah, and I thought the effects look actually worked really well with them. Like, I thought they looked pretty realistic. You know, and I mean, you know, at least to the extent that Avatar does. You know, so sort of on par with the Avatar special effects. But I also thought it worked surprisingly well having a sort of human-sized person standing next to and interacting with these gigantic Tharks. I wasn't quite sure how that was going to play on screen. I thought it might look a little ridiculous, but it actually worked out pretty well.
And you mentioned like how funny it is when Tars Tarkas meets John Carter. And that's really, I mean, this is a funny movie. I mean, there's a lot of funny stuff in it. And the book isn't particularly humorous, you know, and so that's another place that sort of diverges from the book, you know, for the best, I think. But it does make it a little weird sometimes because like the Tharks are basically comic relief, you know, for the most part. But then it sort of, every once in a while they're shooting babies or branding people with a hot iron or something. And there's sort of a weird discontinuity there or juxtaposition there. And I mean, and a lot of the humor too is sort of physical humor or sort of visual humor, like the part where, you know, Tars Tarkas wants them all to be quiet and uses all his different hands to cover up all their mouths at the same time. You know, stuff like that. The stuff like that is really pretty funny. The thing I really didn't particularly like about the whole Thark sequence was how they had cut out what's my favorite part actually of Princess of Mars, which is Sola's story. And I guess it's sort of still in there a little bit. Yeah. But you know, they have the characters of Sola and Sarkosia in particular. Is sort of a nasty female Thark, and she just doesn't really do much in this movie. Okay, but so then the next thing that happens is the Tharks witness an aerial battle between the Zidangans and the Heliumites, and that was awesome. Yeah, so I mean, you know, John Carter just like jumps up onto one of these flying ships and is just kicking ass, and then rescues Dejah Thoris, and then she's kicking ass. The whole audience is cheering.
You know, it was. I thought him rescuing her. They played that really well because, like, you know, I mean, one of the criticisms of the books is that, you know, Dejah Thoris is always getting rescued by John Carter, and so like it's like she's an important character, but she almost never does anything, right? And so she always has to have her man save her. But but they still needed to have them get together, you know, like have some, you know, have them meet and bond, and so. She's like falling off one of the airships, and because he has these amazing jumping abilities, he sees this happening and he jumps and saves her. And so that was like a good way of him actually saving her without like where it's like, well, she couldn't have saved herself and she was just going to die. So that was good. But then like he goes to actually save her further with sword play, but it turns out that she's like basically a better swordsman than he is. So they made a nice little turnaround there of our expectations, because we thought like, oh well, John Carter's just going to save her and she's going to sort of be meekly hiding behind him. But then it turns out that she can very easily take care of herself.
Yeah, so I mean, all that stuff was really good. I actually really liked the costumes of the Red Martians. I thought that they were sort of evocative of Burroughs without being completely ridiculous, which is a very hard line to walk.
Yeah.
And because because basically everyone on Barzoom in the book is described as being pretty much naked all the time, and so they sort of had costumes that were kind of exposed skin, but still sort of looked reasonably practical.
Yeah, and I thought they did a fairly good job of making them look red, without actually having their skin just be red. I think that's a hard line to sort of to walk, in order to try to make them look like actual aliens with a different skin color. But yet they're still obviously just human otherwise, But I mean, I thought they did a pretty good job. I mean, they sort of rely on like sort of tattoos and or sort of that kind of marking on their bodies that were red, and sort of gave their overall skin tones a reddish hue.
Yeah, so I guess I just like visually all that stuff, just worked really well for me.
Yeah, I mean, visually overall, the movie's actually quite impressive on basically every level. I mean, I can't think of anything that I would complain about as far as the visuals.
Yeah, I could see, during that scene why, I was thinking like, yeah, I can definitely see why this movie cost $250 million plus. So John Carter wants to get back to Earth, and Dejah Thoris wants him to fight for helium. Incidentally, I was wondering if they were going to change the pronunciation for the movie to helium or something that didn't just sound like the gas, but they didn't. I have mixed feelings about that name. But anyway, so they decide they're going to go down the river Is. This is like probably my favorite part of the Barzoom trilogy. The first trilogy is the part where they go to the Valley Door. And so I didn't like this at all in the movie. I mean, what happens in Gods of Mars is that the religion of Barzoom is that, when, the people, they live for hundreds of years, and when you reach a sufficiently advanced age, and you're ready to sort of go to heaven, you're supposed to sail down this river, and you go to this valley that's supposed to be like heaven. But then it turns out that when you get there, it's this really nightmarishly horrible place where you're just immediately set upon by these plant monsters and killed. And you're in this sort of, you're in this valley with high mountains on every side, so there's no escape. And I actually was reading online that people think that maybe this scene inspired H.P. Lovecraft to come up with a lot of his monsters, because the plant men are these sort of tentacled, faceless, weird monsters. So I really liked that, and none of that happens really in the movie. It's just sort of they sail down the river Is, and we get some sort of some exposition about Thurn technology. And that left me, a lot of this movie was really, this is the point where the movie starts to become kind of confusing. And I'm not actually sure whether it's more confusing for people who have read the books or who haven't. I think it's confusing probably for both, for different reasons. But I was really confused, like, okay, so in this movie, what happens to the people who sail down, the other pilgrims, right, who sail down the river Is? What happens to them? I mean, we see that there's other people doing it, but there's no valley, etc. I mean, it seems like they kind of tried to stay true to that idea by having the Warhoon sort of ambush them in that general vicinity. And so there's the same kind of thing where John Carter is fighting hundreds of this sort of endless waves of monsters and prevailing. I guess you didn't really like that part, right? Or you had some issues with that?
Yeah, I mean, it was cool and all, but it seemed a little hard to believe that, even John Carter is as awesome as he is with his, standing alone with his two swords against this horde of Warhoon. Remember, the Warhoon are the same race as the Tharks. It's just a different tribe, and so they're like 14-foot tall, four-armed, gigantic aliens that they can kick a lot of ass. And so one little human, even one that has stronger muscles because he comes from a world of greater gravity. It seems a little hard to believe that he could take out so many. And I guess he does get defeated by them. He gets knocked out and everything, but still, it's like, he took out he took out like piles and piles of Warhoon, so that it was like he was just like it was like a massacre. It's a little hard to believe, but and the thing is, it's like he sends Dejah Thoris away, but it's like, well, if he just kept her with him, they probably could have just killed them all, because I mean she's at least as good as he is, so if not better. So
after the initial introduction of Dejah Thoris, which I really liked, I started to get really annoyed by her. And like the thing I just don't understand, there's another sort of confusing thing is that she seems to not believe him when he says that he's from Earth, even though he can jump like 500 feet in the air and looks totally unlike anyone else she's ever seen before in her life.
Yeah.
And it just that doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Yeah, no, I agree. But, the moments like that are few and far between in the movie, I should say. I mean, overall, I think I think it's fair to say we both enjoyed it. I mean, at least I did. So I mean, I don't want people to think that we're hating on the movie. It's as fans of the Barsoom books, as fans of the Barsoom books, just we have high expectations, and we're, of course, and as geeks, we're gonna nitpick. So
yeah, well, I would say I really really liked the parts I've mentioned, the first 30 minutes or so up to that airship battle, and then the rest of the movie I thought was really pretty uneven. But yeah, there were sort of there were high points throughout, though.
Yeah.
I mean, but I mean, speaking of the trailer, though, I don't get those trailers at all, having seen the movie, because I mean, that airship battle is so cool. I mean, that's the first thing I would have stuck in the movie. If I were making a trailer, I would just have that. I would just show that scene.
Actually, yeah, speaking of which, I mean, everybody by now has probably seen this fan trailer that someone cut together of all the existing trailers, which is actually way better than any of the official trailers. But even that, and I mean, obviously the person who did the fan trailer was restricted by what was already out there, because, he didn't have access to the whole movie. But I mean, having seen the movie, it's like, wow, that's just that is not the trailer at all I would put together. I mean,
Yeah, and I mean, the trailers made it look like a ripoff of Avatar, basically. Basically everyone I talked to said, "Oh, I already saw Avatar. I don't need to see this." And that's a fairly small part of the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, one of the things that I thought was great about the fan trailer is that they try to emphasize, this is a movie 100 years in the making, from the mind of Edgar Rice Burroughs. And it's like the official trailers, didn't try to capitalize on that at all. And, I mean, given that they even dropped the of Mars from the title so that it's just called John Carter, it's like, I mean, it's even less, likely to, to make people who are only sort of partially familiar with the books or only heard of them to even make the connection,
So John Carter, they get back with the Tharks, and Tars Tarkas is now a prisoner, and John Carter is now a prisoner, and they have to go to a gladiator arena to fight some 4-armed white apes who have been made 10 times the size that they are in the books. I wasn't crazy about any of that, honestly.
Also, this is sort of the ultimate insult to Sarkoja here in this scene, because Sarkoja ends up in the arena with them, and then she's basically just torn in half by a white ape, and that's that's her end. It's like, oh, all right. I mean, I thought she had stuff to do in the story, but I guess not. I mean, she's just sort of a minor antagonist, sort of kind of a jerk. She's just kind of a jerk in the movie. She doesn't really do anything, I mean, she's just there to annoy people, I guess, and then she gets torn in half. So
yeah, and it's not even, it's happens so, it's so, she dies so summarily that you're not even sure, wait, who was that? Was that Sarkoja just got ripped in half? I'm not even sure.
Yeah, no, I knew it was Sarkoja, but I wasn't actually sure afterward if she actually had died or not. Maybe she just got brutalized or something and she somehow survived that, but no, I'm pretty sure now in retrospect, after talking about it afterward, I think she did get torn in half there. So,
but so the whole gladiator thing, I didn't like at all. It's not in the book that I remember, certainly. And that actually brings me to sort of I was looking over some of the reviews of the movie, and it was really annoying me how many reviews were by people who had obviously never read the books and were saying we're saying dumb things, attributing things in the movie to Edgar Rice Burroughs, You know, like that was one thing where they said like, oh, like this gladiators, you know, a gladiator type scene like this may have been good in 1912, but we've seen it a million times since then. And you're like, no, actually, it's not in the book. There was somebody said, you know, like, because John Carter has such a Han Solo vibe in this movie, you know, they said, you know, one of the reviews I read said like, you know, having a Han Solo type character might have as the main character might have been good in 1912, but you know, when George Lucas had the good sense to make him not the main character, like stuff like that just drives me crazy, you know. I mean, and then so John Carter kills these white apes, and then somehow all the Tharks then want to fight to the death for him, and I didn't understand that at all.
I wasn't thrilled with how he he ends up like killing one of the white apes, and it like lands on top of him, and like he tunnels through it with his sword and bursts out the top of it like covered in blue blood.
Yeah, I didn't like that either. That was total. It was sort of an Evil Dead moment in the middle of the movie. But I kind of wish. I mean, I was sort of thinking. I wish they had kept it a little closer to the book, and had the whole thing where they go to the Valley Door and discover that the Therns have made up this whole religion to kill people and stuff, and then they reveal that, and that sort of is what gets the Tharks to change sides, you know. But in general, though, the climactic stuff just felt very pro forma to me. I've just felt like every other movie I've ever seen where there has to be a big battle at the end, and
and the hero has to get the girl, and stop her from marrying the wrong guy,
Although I did really like the last image, where he's sort of saying Barsoom, and he's going back to Barsoom, and I was like, yeah, he's going back to Barsoom. It's funny, actually. The more I think about this movie, the more I like it. I had very mixed feelings about it when it ended, but I find myself now kind of wishing I could watch the airship battle again. And if they made another one, I might go see it.
Yeah, I mean, I actually am planning to go see it again because I actually before we knew that we were going to see an advanced screening of this, I had made plans with my friend Rob to go see the movie. At this one particular theater, it's like the best theater I've ever been to in New York, and so we're going to go see the movie there in IMAX 3D and on opening day. And so I actually extended my trip to New York here so that I could do that. And yeah, I mean, I'm happy to go see it again. I'd love to see it again, especially in that amazing theater. So, I mean, yeah, it's at least good enough that I'm willing to go pay for it, even after I got to see it for free. So, like I said, it's not a great movie, but I mean, I think it's fun. Especially if, if you haven't read the books and you don't have any attachment to them, I think it's probably even more fun because then you're not, you don't have any expectations or, you're not comparing it to anything. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely worthwhile.
Okay, so John, you just edited this Barzoom anthology. Just want to maybe explain that for people who are just listening to this for the first time.
Sure. Yeah, so I edited a book called Under the Moons of Mars: New Adventures on Barsoom, and it's 14 stories of sort of the further adventures of John Carter and friends. And so Dave has a story in there. And also Joe Lansdale, Catherine M. Valente, Jonathan Mayberry, Tobias Buckell, and 14 stories altogether. So some of the stories are sort of about John Carter. They focus on John Carter. Some of them focus on new characters, or like Tharks, like Dave's story is about Tharks, and others focus on other characters. Like there's a story about Woola. Actually, we didn't talk about Woola at all. Woola was a great character in the movie. But Woola is sort of John Carter's like dog-like companion, but it's an alien. It's an alien dog. Yeah, but I mean, one of the interesting things about the book is that not only does it sort of tell new adventures, but it sort of some of the stories also sort of critique some of Burroughs' attitudes and also sort of contemporize some of Burroughs' ideas as well. Because if you try to read the original books now, it's like they can be kind of hard to read as a modern reader. But yeah, so I mean, I think the writers did a good job of staying true to Burroughs while at the same time, sort of updating Barsoom a bit. Like Cat Valente's story, it's a story from like the Tharks' point of view, and it basically talks about how what John Carter told you isn't exactly right. Like he didn't really understand their culture like he thought he did, and so this is the true story of the Tharks, And Theodore Augustus' story is about Woola, like I said, and so like it sort of kind of does something similar for the Callets, and it's sort of it's Woola's story from Woola's point of view, and so there's other things like that in there that I think are it's an interesting take on the setting. And so yeah, if anybody is interested in the anthology, if you go to my website johnjosephadams.com/Barsoom, there's actually a little site set up just for the anthology there, and you can read a few free stories, and you can read interviews with most of the authors and also some of the artists, and you can also look at all of the artwork from the anthology. So, and because each story has an illustration that goes along with it, so if you want to sort of preview before you buy it, you can go over there and check it out.
And I mean, also, we did this reading for the book in Brooklyn, and many of the authors and artists came, and we all sort of just talked about the series. And one of the things that one of the artists said that I thought was really interesting, but he was just talking about how he had read what an influence Burroughs was on a whole generation of NASA scientists, that if you talk to NASA scientists of a certain generation, an incredibly high percentage of them got interested in outer space after reading the John Carter stories. And I was actually just reading an article where it was saying that Carl Sagan, for a time, was flirting with the idea of getting a vanity license plate that said Barsoom. So I thought that was pretty cool. I guess just the last thing maybe I wanted to mention was in our interview with Michael Chabon, he was talking about how Burroughs dropped the idea of telepathy because it makes storytelling impossible if every character knows the thoughts and agenda of every other character. That's actually something I've been sort of struggling with recently, because there's been all this stuff in the news about how functional MRI technology is getting good enough that it seems that in the not too distant future, it actually will be possible to build a reliable lie detector and read people's minds, with some degree of accuracy, with a fairly high degree of accuracy. And so whenever I'm thinking now about a story set in the future, I just think, is this story going to have to involve technology that can read everyone's minds? And that just makes it really hard to, as Michael Chabon was saying, to tell a story.
Well, yeah, I know. I mean, it's an interesting dilemma. I mean, I know a lot of people sort of thought that the mystery story would die when cell phones came along, because so many mystery stories relied on the protagonist not being able to get to a phone in time to, to make that crucial phone call or something. But, but mystery stories have survived and even thrived, despite the presence of cell phones. So, I think that writers are pretty clever, and we'll probably come up with some ways of working around that. I mean, the Alfred Bester novel, the Demolished Man, is set in a world where telepathy is possible, and the protagonist who basically figures out a way around that.
I think that's kind of a cheat, though, the Demolished Man, because I used to read about that story as an example of a murder mystery set in a society where everyone's telepathic, and I thought that was such a cool idea. How do you do that? But then it turns out the guy just memorizes this funny rhyme, and then he's just thinking about that, and then people try to read his minds, and all they get is this stupid rhyme he keeps repeating in his mind, stuff like that. It doesn't really tell a story of trying to do a murder mystery where everyone knows everything that you're thinking. This is actually something that confuses me about of the novel Princess of Mars, but everybody's supposed to be telepathic. But then Sola knows that Tarstarchus is her father, but nobody knows that. But she's keeping that a secret, right?
Yeah.
Is there any explanation for that?
I don't know. I don't remember that. Yeah.
If anyone has an explanation for that, let me know. Because I've been wondering about that. All right, so I think we're going to wrap things up there. We'd really like to thank Michael Chabon for being our guest today. If you have any questions or comments about anything we just talked about, please post a comment on this episode over at Wired.com. And you can find that by visiting our website at geeksguideshow.com and clicking on the link for episode 55. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your hosts, visit johnjosephadams.com or davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by Slipgate 9 Entertainment. If you enjoyed this program, Tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.